It is 4 o'clock. I call the meeting to order. Our first item is our pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Vice Chair, could you read our mission statement?
The mission of the Marshall Public School District is to educate, support, and prepare all learners for success.
Thank you. Approval of the agenda. May we have a motion?
So moved. I'll second.
Any additions? Hearing none, please vote. It is approved. Public forum. Now this is a time the public can approach the board. Anybody in the audience? Moving on to our presentation. Our first presentation is on homeless. Ms. Kay, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, evening, whatever we want to call this one, I guess. Is this on, Tricia? Okay. Set the arrow. Well, I am the homeless liaison at Marshall Public Schools, and I have been since I believe it was about 2013. I followed Heidi Critchley at the refuge, and that's how it got started. And then shortly after that, all districts were required through the state. It's the National Coalition of Homeless Education federally that all LEAs were responsible for having a designated homeless school liaison at each public school. So at that time, and I don't know exactly when that happened, I know that the McKinney-Vento was from 1987. However, it was reauthorized in about 2015 with Essa. And so maybe 2015, maybe you know, Jeremy, but maybe it was from 1987 too. But regardless, homeless liaisons are responsible for a number of items, and we'll look at some of those in here, but primarily being able to designate and follow the criteria for identifying any of our homeless students. Now, homeless isn't necessarily the way we think of homeless for adults necessarily, but our students who are homeless may be one of 4 categories. We'll get into those as well. So basically, we do everything in our power to make sure that they've got every advantage that they can have while at school, enrolling at school, staying at school, and continuing to stay here if and when they become homeless, if that's their first option and choice as far as their family goes. So there's a few things that we'll go through. Anyway, we'll see if this arrow will work for me. I talked a little bit about the McKinney-Vento Act. That's the one that was, it is federal, and it was 1987 since it was put into effect. You'll see that there's 3 different criteria here. They're not necessarily different. It's an and in here as far as the criteria for identifying a student as homeless. So they have to be fixed, regular, and adequate housing, but we'll start at the top here. Homeless children and youth are those who lack a nighttime residence that is all 3 of those things. So it has to be fixed, so stationary, permanent, and not subject to change. In other words, they really have to be legally bound to that environment. If they don't have legal rights to stay in that home in the evening, they're probably homeless. Regular, used on a nightly basis, and adequate. So even if there's not running water, if there's not heat to a location, they could be identified as homeless because of those areas. You'll see at the bottom there too that it talks a little bit about the reauthorization of Essa in 2015, and that was put together especially because they wanted the next 3 things put into place for our homeless kids. So there's immediate enrollment, school stability, and academic support. Before that occurred, our students didn't necessarily get enrolled immediately because they might not have had a birth certificate or records transferred or some of those other things. So this is a guarantee that all of our kids in a homeless category have to start on the day that they register. So, examples of children who are, or youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So the majority of our kids that we identify are in that top category, sharing the housing of other persons due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason. So anytime that they're doubled up, they can be doubled up with another family. It might be with a grandparent. It might be with an aunt or an uncle. It might be that it's completely okay with that other family, but it has to be for financial, economic purposes that they're actually living together. So some of our generational families who live together are not considered homeless. Those are not financial or economic reasons behind it. Living in hotels, motels. I don't know if some of you remember the Refuge. That organization was from about 2010 to 2014, and the Refuge then went under UCAP, and it still exists. It's just under UCAP. So our hotel, motel is still financed through the Refuge in UCAP. That makes sense to everybody? Okay. Living in emergency or transitional housing, abandoned in hospitals, that can be a pre-adolescent, it can be a baby, it can be any of those categories. Living in public or private places not designated ordinarily for human beings, living in cars, parks, public spaces, migratory children living in any of those above categories. And then you'll see at the bottom of this one, the term unaccompanied youth are still considered homeless, but in addition to being homeless, they are without or not in the physical custody of a parent or a guardian. So we hope that when that does happen, it's at the 17, 18, 19-year-old level. And it is more common at those times. MDE, and this is the National Coalition of Homeless Education, data collections. These are the areas in which we are responsible for our reports that go to the state. State goes to the nation. So we take a look at ethnicities. First, we identify our kids based on those other three criteria. And then each one of those kids who are identified have to be identified with their ethnicity, their nighttime residence, whether or not they're migratory, children with disabilities, and that can be a 504 or IDEA in any of those areas, and then our English learner children. So those areas are identified within homeless. Those 4 nighttime residents, those are areas that we have to identify for each one of our homeless kids. They're not always interested in telling us these things, and so our most of the time it's nurses or counselors within the building who do some of those interviews with kids or interviews with parents of the students, just depending on the circumstances. Sometimes somebody completely different from that gets the information for us to take a look at all of the details in order to identify whether or not the student is homeless. Like I said, let me see, the doubled up, the second one down in those 4 is the one that most of our students qualify under for the number of students who are identified as homeless. So transitional housing, the doubled up category, unsheltered. I don't remember the last time we had a student who was identified for that purpose or within that category. And then hotel, motel. If you guys have questions, please just holler anytime. And as usual, and as I think most of us would assume, that our most marginalized populations are the ones that are highest at risk. It's our kids with disabilities, it's our minority ethnicities, it's our English learners, it's our migratory children. This slide tells us a lot about the higher risk populations as far as homelessness goes, and I'm just going to read through these top 6. 3, and I always am confused with anything that's over 100%. It's like, what do you mean over 100%? But this is data that comes from the University of Chicago. It's fairly recent data. It's Voices of Youth Count, and they're continually doing homeless research. 346%. First one, youth with less than a high school diploma or GED had a 346% higher risk. Several of our kids right now and in recent past come from families where a parent or both parents come out of this category. Youth reporting annual household income of less than $24,000 at the poverty level is 162% higher risk. Black or African American youth had an 83% higher risk. Our LGBTQ youth had 120% higher risk. Our Hispanic non-white youth had a 33% higher risk, and our unmarried, which is usually female parenting youth, had a 200% higher risk of being homeless at some time in their lives. At the bottom here, it talks a little bit about it, and in some of the trainings and such, especially at the state level, we rural people will say, is this really more of an urban problem? And what's been discovered through the research is that it's not any more of an urban problem than it is at the rural setting. It's just it's a similar percentage, but percentages are pretty reflective at the national level as well as the state level to rural. So certainly there's more resources as soon as our kids are in an urban area. So we do have to take a look at things a little differently when we're more rural. These are a couple comparisons. On the left is national comparisons from 2018-19. Our reports are due in October of a year for the prior year. So we're always a year behind minimally. And nationally, the NCHE, their most recent data they had available for me last week was the 18-19. So that's why I pulled in the 18-19 for Marshall Public. You'll see in what is grayed out there is the doubled up percentages for our kids. And let me see if I've got that. Should have made that a little bigger for you. At the national level, that's 78%. And at Marshall Public Schools, that was 70%. And this is pretty consistent as far as the numbers on the right for Marshall Public, as far as the number of kids, the percentage of our homeless kids. And then in the little darker pie here, so right in here, which is similar for Marshall Public, that is 7% at the national level, and it is 25% for Marshall Public. And then the deeper purple color is 5% for Marshall Public, and it is 11% at the national level, which is the transitional housing. And then the brown piece in the national, which is not reflected in Marshall Public, is the unsheltered. So that's where those are. And that was 5% there. This one is reflective of the numbers that we've turned in each year since 2013. And again, these numbers go from 22 students total for homeless identified on the far right in 2021 to 50 for 2015-2016. And you know, when we talk about it being, what do we have, like 2,500 kids now, pre-K-12? Certainly 22 are not a lot of students, but you know, when you look at in the eyes of a little person who doesn't have a home to go to at night, every single one of those kiddos count. This is something that's happening at both the state and national level, where they're seeing fewer kids identified, and they're not very certain whether or not the lack of identification is because we don't have our hands on enough of them, or if it's because youth homelessness is truly decreasing. So they're hoping to be able to discover some of that here in the next year and two. But certainly COVID threw a lot of wrenches in some of this too. A lot of our economically challenged families were able to find some cash through state different agencies. And so they had a different level of housing, and some had even less. So they're really trying to discover reasoning behind that decrease in numbers. I can tell you that, you know, trying to identify our kids, we identify based on new kids coming in. They fill out the registration forms. There's a question within the registration form that they can alert us, flag us, and our MARS coordinator registration individuals take a look at that. They try to notify me as well as a point of contact at each building. so that we can look into it further to see whether or not it was a mismark, whether or not there's some other necessities that we're missing. If it's a homeless child truly, and we need to go through some more of the organization and make sure that some of the resources are present for the child. There just hasn't been a perfect way to make sure that we're getting all of our kids identified. So we'll continue to work on that, but there's...
Does DHS inform you? I mean, if a child moves from like the metropolitan area and had been homeless, they don't have that information. Basically, we're the identifiers at school.
True. We do work, this is the first year that we put together the continuum of care with UCAP and a number of organizations within the community and county. So we do have a right to have some conversations with those organizations, but they're typically after the fact, after we've been able to identify a student as homeless and what the needs are, Bill. So
you work collaboratively to put the services together with them once you know.
I would say that, yes. And certainly we do that not just at my end, but certainly at the counseling, at every single one of the buildings. They're really good at making sure that the resources are in place for our kiddos. So, yeah. This one kind of covers more of the school responsibilities than student rights, but in turn, the school responsibility becomes a student's right when a child is identified as homeless. First of all,
Are they still working on that system?
Do we need
No, I'm
that?
getting the it's okay. We're good.
The workers were here doing something with that system today, so.
Fire alarm.
Yeah.
oh,
It works.
and you guys knew that was going to happen.
No.
Okay.
At 2:30.
I'm just going to go from top to right. Help identify policy barriers to homeless students' enrollment, attendance, and success, including barriers caused by fees, fines, and absences. That is part of our job in making sure that a student can attend and be involved in any and all, regardless of the money attached to it. Build awareness within the district. This is something I need to do a better job of, but I do feel like we do a pretty good job of making sure that counselors, nurses, and I are pretty involved and inclusive within that one. It would just be nice to have one more link where all staff get some level of training in what homeless is. And I think when I looked last, there might be a possibility in safe schools to be able to do that so that everybody just gets the basic necessities of it. So. Link school and community resources, continue child's education in the school of origin. This is kind of a question for a lot of people, is that if a child becomes homeless when they were attending Marshall Public Schools and now they live in Tracy because it's the closest place they could find to live with an uncle or an aunt or something, our obligation is to make sure they can get to school and back home again. So we provide the transportation between those, and they have a right to come to Marshall Public to a minimum for the remainder of that school year. So unless a parent makes a priority request, though this next one is exactly that. Consider student-centered factors regarding best interest with priority to parent or guardian input. Provide right to appeal when disagreement occurs. That's at the state level. I would be responsible for making sure that parents are represented within that. Ensure access and educational services when eligible, including early intervention services, preschool programs, anything that the LEA administers. Bottom left is provide referrals for healthcare services, dental, mental, substance abuse, housing, identify and provide transportation. That is our typical one that does cost us some money, but for the most part, that is about it, generally speaking. Unaccompanied youth are provided assistance for completing the FAFSA. That is when students are eligible, so their junior and senior year, then they get assistance in that category. And then ensure that there's free breakfast and lunch available upon enrollment. That used to be something that we had to run through. And as far as I know, that's still in place and will be in place yet through May, at least.
This year at least, yeah.
Okay. So. Homelessness creates barriers, as we all know. Some of these are a little bit redundant. Students experiencing homelessness may be unable to meet standard school enrollment requirements. Attendance is usually a red flag. Move around, change schools a lot, hungry, tired, stressed, depressed, experience trauma. Those are all things that are red flags for counselors, teachers, paras in the system. Not have school supplies or a quiet place to study. Not have access to reliable transportation, that's significant. Not have a parent or guardian to help them, especially our unaccompanied youth. Be falling behind in school and not accruing credits on time, have special education needs or 504s, anything that is IDEA. Be embarrassed and consumed by a stigma related to their housing conditions, lack relationships at school, and we know that that is essential for success for our kids, and a number drop out of school, and it is 87% increased likelihood of dropping out of school, the highest of all the risk factors studied. Understanding common causes, economic challenges, economic where some of the older children are made to feel responsible for contributing to household income, domestic violence, health challenges, disabilities, mental health issues, substance abuse, high health costs, fluctuating unemployment, the abuse and neglect that would go with the domestic abuse, the natural disasters, all of those things, the acute conflict within the original home as far as unaccompanied youth go, pregnancy, sexual orientation, gender identity, blended family issues, and substance abuse. And this is basically our process map for identifying, and it's a little bit messier than this as far as it's just every time a child is identified or there's a possibility. So depending on where the origination began, there's usually a contact with me and or whoever the point of contact is in the school building. We don't have a person who is point of contact at each one of the buildings, but typically one of the counselors and or the nurse. Sometimes it might be the student service secretary or the admin assist, just so they get that information.
This is very confusing when I looked at over. Should that be redone so there is a person?
I'm sorry, Jeff?
This is very confusing, and I looked this over earlier today.
Sure.
Should there be a contact person specified?
The state would say that we should have one point of contact at each building. That would be something that would come somewhere outside of me, so, yeah. But it's basically the point of contact and or me, and then the point of contact, and let's say that's a counselor at the middle school building, and Margot Van Moore goes through whether or not the child needs transportation, needs food service, physical needs, academic needs. If they need transportation, it comes back to me again. I visit with Dion. If it's food service and we didn't have free lunch and breakfast right now, I'd go through Tricia. Margot would go ahead and make sure that physical needs are met either through community resources or through student services where we have a backup supply at each building for kids, as well as academic needs, meaning do they need tutorial? Do they need some kind of a shadow person that they follow, that they work with? Some of those other academic need pieces and or interventions or title or special classes. And then it goes to the MARS coordinator for documentation, and then that person sends it back to me for filing as well. So did that clean it up at all, Jeff?
I just want to make sure, with if nobody's designated to take care of it, somebody could get overlooked.
Yeah. I do think each building does a nice job with identifying a counselor for each student, so every student knows who their counselor is, so that piece is somewhat there. But that's all I've got for you this evening. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you.
Board forum, board members, anybody have anything they'd like to update? Moving on to our discussion items, solar and school grants.
If I can introduce Brock Johnson, we went through a bid process for this project. I talked a little bit with the board about Brock has done a great job communicating with MMU, city, working with Warren and myself, and he's going to present what's been all put together.
Thanks, Dion. Thanks, everybody, for having me. Don't currently have the option to share. There we go. So can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, basically, at the kind of towards the end of the year, the Department of Commerce came out with a grant program designed to promote more solar installs across school districts all throughout Minnesota. There's two separate programs, one for school districts that are outside of XL Energy territory, and then another one for schools that are inside XL. Obviously, Marshall falls into the ones outside, and based on the financial criteria that they used, which is the adjusted net tax capacity divided by the adjusted pupil units, Marshall was eligible to receive 85% of the project costs in grant funding. Based on, sorry, go ahead. Based on the program criteria, you're eligible to apply for a grant for as many buildings as you have, up to 10% of the overall funds, which was about 7.2 million, I believe, for K through 12 school districts. So we went through and applied for the school readiness assessment part of it before January 31st. And I apologize if this is redundant, but then, so the next step is going through and actually fine tuning the details of the projects and submitting the full grant application that is due by May 31st. So as Dion said, been working with the utility, been working with Warren and Dion to identify the project locations, what's going to work best for everybody involved, and hopefully bring these projects to fruition. So a little bit about Solar Connection. We've been around since 2010. We are a preferred vendor on the state master contract as well, and we specialize in commercial, nonprofit, ag, and residential solar installs, along with EV chargers. And we do some with energy storage and things like that as well. All aspects, we do everything in-house, so everything from permitting, design, construction, through remote monitoring, interconnection, and ongoing customer service is all handled by us. We can go to the next slide. So this is just kind of the process that we go through. We've went through and did the site analysis for each location. Once we get to an approval, then we'll go through and design the projects and go through the full grant application with Dion and the school district to have that submitted by May 31st. So with the 5 total projects combined, we're at 248 kilowatts DC. So as far as the financial projections, I just accumulated it into one presentation, but they're 5 individual projects. So the total cost of all 5 projects would be $580,000, $585,280, or $2.36 a watt. We've already done, 99% of the diligence work needed to fine tune that price per watt for the installs. And as far as the grant goes, you're eligible for 85% of that total. So of that $585,280, you would receive $497,488 in grant funding, which leaves $87,792 out of pocket. And as we, talked with Dion a little bit about that, that can be financed if necessary. So then you pay for it over time with savings on your electricity costs. The first year total estimated electricity savings is going to be about $22,000. That's based on basically the reduction in the amount of energy you're going to have to buy from the utility. So that would leave, assuming you're going to pay the balance, you know, just out of your budget. By the time you got that money back with savings on your electricity costs, would be about 4 years. And the systems themselves are anticipated to last, you know, 30 to 40 years total. So if we look at industry averages on utility rate escalations and things like that, the total estimated benefit over 30 years would be about $750,000 in electricity savings combined through all projects. Solar is producing 100% clean energy as well, so there's also the equivalent of offsetting 195 metric tons of CO2 on an annual basis. And then one big part of the grant as well is the educational benefits that this brings to school districts. So there's a lot of learnings that can be taught in the areas of math, science, even trades and ag as well. With ground mount systems, you can plant pollinators or native grasses under them. Obviously, we can, talk about people that want to go into becoming an electrician and just general construction as well. And we do set up these systems to be monitored digitally so that we monitor all our projects online. So if there's ever an issue, we know about it right away. The school would have pretty much the same access. So if you wanted to, put it up on monitors in classrooms or in the hallways so that it shows the production and in the environmental benefits, and that's something we can certainly do as well.
As Brock gets into the locations of the solar panels, I just want to point out a couple of things. One is we did visit with each location building principal to make sure that they were okay with the setup. We weren't taking up green space away from the school, and then also taking into account that
We'll be hopefully tying in some curriculum with this, so the location is close to the building as possible.
So this is these next slides kind of show the preliminary project locations and where we would interconnect with the school's electrical service. And this is based on working with Warren and the utility to make sure we have the locations that will work the best as far as where we can interconnect and what makes the most sense for the school, like Dion said as well. So for the middle school, here's the purple is the area where the solar panels would go. And then it's pointing to the chiller transformer out there is where we would connect into. Southview, unfortunately, being that it's a new building, it doesn't actually show up on the map. But here is where the arrow is pointing to is the meter and transformer. And the solar would just go on the other side of the parking lot. So we would bore under and connect in right there.
For Southview, that's actually one of the drainage ponds. They said it would work perfect in, so it doesn't take any of the green space away.
And then Parkside, we would be up in the northwest corner, and then we would just bore the meter and transformer right on the north side of the school district there, or the school building there. The high school, we would be going on the north side of the parking lot, and then boring to the meter transformer, or actually the transformer on the east side of the building. And then here's the new CTE facility where we would be putting the panels kind of in between the two buildings. And here we could just trench around where the new transformer and meter are going to be placed on the northwest corner of the building. Excuse me. So now just go over the warranties. on the next slide. So all the panels have a 25-year linear production warranty, so they're all rated to produce at the end of 25 years no less than what they did in year one. We factor in about 0.5% of degradation year over year. That's just based on the testing that they go through. But they all come with a minimum linear warranty of no less than 80% production in year 25. The inverter warranty, so on these projects, there's typically 2 to 3 inverters, which the power comes in from the sun in DC, goes to the inverters, which converts them to AC, and then it goes to your meter to be used at the school. The inverters are all going to come with a standard 10-year warranty, and they have options to extend it out to 20 years if desired. There's a 10-year workmanship warranty on the entire project as well. So there's long-term warranties on it. They're very durable systems. We've had a lot of different systems go through 90-mile-an-hour winds, different hail storms. Not saying that, you know, a bad hailstorm can't do some damage, but generally speaking, they're rated to withstand a 1-inch hail going 50 miles an hour and wind speeds of over 100 miles an hour. And then one of the common questions that we get, so the school district would own these projects, which is always going to be better, just speaking solar in general. If you can own them based on incentives from the start, you're going to be better off than doing, you know, a longer term payment plan. So at the end of these systems, you know, there would be the costs of decommissioning them and recycling them. There's already recycling programs getting started for solar, as it's going to be a large business, you know, in the future. And so right now, from what I've seen, it costs about $25 per panel to recycle. But then there's also some reusable materials in there too that would give some added benefit. So with that, I'm happy to go back through any slide or answer any questions that you all have.
When will it be in operation? Would you work this summer?
So right now we're estimating September, October of this year. It would definitely be this year. It's just a matter of, you know, how long does it take to get through permitting and first getting notification that the grant has been accepted and that sort of thing.
What if the grant's not accepted, or is that a possibility, or if we don't get the full 85%?
So with the school readiness, the first part of the application that we went through, the funds are reserved for each one of these projects. So they've already been approved. We just have to go through and submit the full grant application. So as long as everything, you know, we do everything with the full grant application, I don't foresee any danger of not getting the funds, as they've already been approved.
Part of the recommendation that you guys will be voting on tonight is pending on the approval of the grant. And just to kind of go over a little bit of
Share that update with you.
This failure rate in semester one, is that kind of high or is that about average?
Right now, it's actually coming back down from where we're heading. So
that's looking at the number of students failing any class. You know, it wouldn't be all the classes, but if they're failing any single class, they would be included in that number.
Jeremy, out of curiosity, looking at the statewide rate, being that Marshall is still above the statewide average, did that show a dip over the pandemic? I mean, how far is that down in comparison to what we were down?
I brought that with me. I didn't bring that with me. It was down some. I don't remember how much. It was slightly down though as well for this last year.
Okay.
I think the failure rate's really going to progress from the pandemic. Wouldn't show last year. It's probably going to show this year and next year if we're
I
not
think it's something
careful.
we could see for a while, and I think, we're learning that we've experienced whole new ways of teaching. So I think students are finding, oh, I really like the online, or I hate the online, and let's find different ways. I think that's part of the CTE work we're doing, is creating more opportunities for students and meeting them where they're at, and more of the hands-on and those different learning styles, really addressing that, knowing that we've found that we can meet student needs in different ways. We want to continue to do that.
Thank you. Moving on to our discussion items, second reading of policies 407 to 413. Any questions? Any comments? Moving on to our action items. Our first action items is the approval of the district solar project. Motion to approve it. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I think it's a great project. I'll call for a vote. And it passes. The next action item is approval of the utility easement with MMU.
So moved.
I'll second.
Open for discussion.
It's just an agreement with MMU to grant them easement at the middle school and Southview.
Any questions? Hearing none, please vote. It is approved. Approval of the dental insurance rate increase. Motion to approve. Do we have a second? Open for discussion.
As we went out and went to some different companies for pricing for our dental this year, we're staying with the same company, but we are self-funded, so we take a pretty deep look at that. And as you can see, we haven't had a price increase or a premium increase for our employees, which we dictate since 1920. Just looking at the usage compared to the premiums coming in, we needed to raise the premiums a little bit. It's $24 a year for single, $60 a year for employee plus one, and $72 a year for family. That's also something we have our non-certified negotiations this year that will probably encourage them to look at that as part of the district commitment to try and offset some of that increase.
For the same coverage, Dion?
When you said 1920, I just, like 100 years ago, I said, I don't think we had
It's been a
dental
long
insurance
time.
100 years ago.
It has been a long time. If dental insurance was over $1,000 in 1920.
All right, thank you. We'll go ahead and vote, please. It does pass. The next action item is approval of our seniority list. Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Please vote. And it passes. Thank you, board members. Meeting is adjourned.